Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English. In our today's video, we'll try to understand why is rupee for a long period of time the value of rupees is falling and what is the impact of this fall of value of rupee on our day-to-day lives. That is what we are going to understand. Now, fall in the value of rupee basically means, for example, if $1 was equal to 80 rupees before, if it increases to 85 or 90 for that matter, that is what is called as fall of rupee. Okay, so we'll understand this in our today's video. And the notes, if you want to download them, they will be made available on this particular Telegram channel. And these are important for your exam, so please do not forget to download them. And while you're at it, please do not forget also to subscribe to this channel. Okay, so let us start by understanding what is happening. Now, if you have looked at the value of rupee vis-a-vis US dollar, you may have realized that rupee is sliding down for a long period of time. Few years back, that is about 10 years back, the value of $1 was equal to somewhere around 50 rupees. And this has now fallen down to historic low, that is of 89.2 rupees against $1 before bouncing back slightly. But the moot point of this discussion is that the value of rupee is falling down for a long period of time. And this matters even to people like you and I in our day-to-day lives. So how does it matter? We'll try to understand this. But before that, you need to understand how is the value of rupee vis-a-vis any foreign currency, for example, US dollar, is calculated and what are the processes through which the value of rupee may increase or reduce, right? So we'll understand this. First, let me begin to understand or help you understand the factor of how value of rupee is calculated against any foreign currency. Now, I need to understand in modern day economy, there are two ways in which the value of a foreign currency is determined with respect to domestic currency. First is a fixed exchange rate system where government fixes the value of a rupee vis-a-vis dollar, and another one is market determined exchange rates where the value of rupee vis-a-vis dollar may increase or decrease because of the factors of demand and supply. But like most modern economies, including India, we do not follow a strict market-based determination system of foreign currency. We follow what is called as a managed float system. So what happens in managed float system? Let me tell you that. Now, in a managed float system, what happens is usually the value of rupee vis-a-vis dollar, it changes automatically due to factors of demand as well as the factors of supply of these respective currencies. So this is what happens in the usual circumstances. But in the period of excess volatility, it is the central bank of the country, which in India's case, it is the Reserve Bank of India, which intervenes in the forex market in order to reduce the excess volatility in the exchange rate system. So there are two factors that determines the value of rupee. First is the factor of demand and supply, and second is the factor of intervention by the central bank of any country, which in India's case, I've already told you, it's the Reserve Bank of India. So let us understand how factors of demand and supply impact the value of rupee vis-a-vis dollar. Now, for a hypothetical example, let us consider $1 here equals to rupees 85. So this is the present value, hypothetically, the value of rupee vis-a-vis a foreign currency, that is US dollar. Now, suppose in that case, the demand for dollar increases. So what would happen if a demand of dollar increases? Naturally, if demand of any commodity increases, its value also increases. Now, whenever value of dollar increases, when you compare it with rupee, corresponding value of rupee would decline, right? So in this case, if $1 equals to rupees 85, and then if the value or demand of dollar increases, then it would decrease the value of Indian rupee to say 90 rupees. And this is an example of fall in the value of rupee because you are able to shell out more amount of rupee right now to buy one single unit of dollar. And this is what is called as the depreciation of Indian rupee. And this process is called as what? Depreciation of rupee. Now let us suppose opposite happens. If the demand for dollar decreases, so what would happen to the value of dollar? Any guesses? The value of dollar would also reduce and the corresponding value of rupee would now increase. So in this case, the value of rupee would increase from rupees, let us suppose it was 85 rupees for $1 before. This would reduce to, let us say, rupees 80 per dollar. Now to buy $1, you have to shell out less amount of rupee. So this means the value of rupee is increasing. And this process is called as appreciation of rupee. Understood? The difference between appreciation and depreciation. Depreciation, once again, happens when the value of rupee declines vis-a-vis US dollar. And appreciation happens when value of rupee increases with respect to dollar. Understood this difference? So this is how factor of demand affects the value of rupee vis-a-vis dollar. Now, same is also true with respect to supply of any commodity. Now, when you understand supply of dollar suppose is less, it would prop up the value of dollar and corresponding the value of rupee would fall down. Similarly, if supply of dollar is in plenty, it would reduce the demand of dollar and correspondingly it would also reduce the value of dollar, and the corresponding increase in the value of rupee would be increase, right? So this is how factors of demand and supply affects the availability and the value of dollars. Now let us understand how a central bank intervenes in cases of excess volatility. Now, what would happen if the value of rupee were to fall very fast? This automatically becomes a negative news for our importers because they'll have to shell out more amount of rupees for same amount of dollars. So in that case, RBI decides to intervene. How RBI decides to intervene? I told you, whenever demand of dollar is high, it leads to increase in value of dollar, and the same corresponding whenever the value of dollar increases, the value of rupee decreases, right? So this is how what happens in the case of without any intervention of the Central Bank of India. Now, whenever the demand of dollar increases, you need to understand demand of any commodity increases when the supply of this commodity does not able to manage or match the demand. So in this case, RBI decides to intervene in the Forex market and it decides to increase the supply of dollar. So when the supply of dollar increases, the corresponding demand of dollar would cool down and it would also cool down the fall in the value of rupee. So this is how central bank would intervene in case of rapid case of depreciation of rupee, that RBI would sell dollars in the forex market in order to increase the supply of dollars. Now the opposite happens when the rupee value is rising too fast. Now when rupee value is rising too fast, it is a negative news for exporters of India because their exports become expensive in the foreign markets. So in that case also, in case of excess rise in the value of rupee, RBI also decides to intervene. How it intervenes? It intervenes exactly opposite how it was intervening before. So when the value of rupee is increasing, you need to understand the supply and demand of dollars is less in the economy. So to compensate for this reduced supply of dollar, let me rephrase it. When the value of rupee is increasing, it means the supply of dollar in the Indian forex market is very high and corresponding the demand of dollar is very less. So what would RBI do in this case? RBI would buy excess dollar from the forex market in order to create a supply crunch, and this supply crunch would cool down the value of rupee by increasing the value of dollar. So in case of excess appreciation, RBI decides to buy dollar, and in case of excess depreciation, RBI decides to sell dollars in the forex market. So this is how factors of demand and supply works, and to check these factors of demand and supply, in some cases, in cases of excess volatility both up and down, RBI decides to intervene in the market. Understood? Now let us understand how or what are the reasons why is value of rupee falling down for a long period of time. Presently, there is an uncertainty with respect to whether India will sign a trade deal with US. And why do we need a trade deal with US? Because US is India's biggest export market, and you may have realized since Donald Trump came into power, he has imposed several tariffs on Indian origin goods, which means exports to US markets have become expensive, and naturally the value of exports have also fallen down in order to US markets. So what does market want from Indian point of view? from Indian point of view, the market wants India-US trade deal to happen as soon as possible so that it would lead to normalization of export levels to US market. So in many cases, you will realize these financial markets, markets relating to stock markets, foreign exchange, they work on sentiment. So whenever there is a negative sentiment, the market would react negatively, and whenever there is a positive sentiment, the market would react positively. So suppose if tomorrow the US trade deal happens, it would lead to appreciation of rupee. Why? Because normalization of exports would happen. And why is export necessary? Because by exporting our products, we are getting dollars from them, right? So this is why uncertainty, which is currently prevailing whether India would sign its trade deal with US, this uncertainty has added an element of negativity in the forex market. And what is negativity is here? That is, we are not able to export as many products as we have wanted in respect to US, and that is why we are not able to earn as much as dollars. So there is a supply deficit, or there is an expected supply deficit of dollars in Indian market, which has put a pressure or a downward pressure on the value of rupee. So this is the first reason, that is uncertainty associated with India-US trade deal. Now, second factor is the Federal Reserve policy of US. Now, RBI in India is the Central Bank of India. Similarly, in US, it is the US Federal Reserve, which decides on the US's monetary policy. Now, interest rate, which is prevailing in a country, it is directly in relation to the yields of that bond. So suppose if US Federal Bank decides to follow easy money policy by reducing the interest rate in US economy, this would mean that other financial instruments like bonds, their demand increases. So in cases of reduction in interest rate in US market, the bond prices or the prices of bond that you pay to buy a US government security would increase, and as we know, the yields of the bond is in negative correlation with bond prices, so the yields would fall. Now, what happened recently in the US Federal Reserve policy meeting was that they decided to hold on the higher interest rate for a foreseeable future. Now, what signal does this send to the market? The signal this move sends to the market that going forward, at least 1 or 2 months forward, US Federal Reserve is not going to reduce the interest rate. So when the US Federal Reserve is not going to reduce the interest rate, what would happen? The bond prices won't go up. That is, the bond prices would go down, because it does not make a sense for investors to invest in bonds when the interest rate is already high. So what would happen when interest rate stays on a higher levels for a longer period of time? The interest in bonds reduces, and as a result, bond prices also fall down, and there is a negative correlation with yields, so the bond yields stay up. So for example, if an investor is invested in Indian markets, it would make a perfect sense for them to invest in US government securities because of the higher yields that might be there. So there is also pressure in Indian economy that investors who have invested in Indian economy might sell their investment here and take their money elsewhere in US government bond securities. So higher than expected or higher for longer monetary policy of US Federal Reserve has led to outflow of foreign capital out of India, and when you sell foreign capital in India, you naturally increase the demand of dollar, and whenever demand for dollar increases, you have already understood, the value of rupee would fall down, and when value of rupee would fall down, this is what? This is depreciation of rupee. Understood? Now let us understand the third. The direct consequence of the second slide that we did today, that is the higher for longer policy of US Federal Reserve, has led to pressures in foreign portfolio investment in India. Foreign portfolio investors, they are short-term investors, also called as hot money investors. So these investors, they are pulling out of their investments from Indian economy and they are taking money to US markets. So what has happened when they are selling their investments in India? This increases the demand of dollar in India, and whenever demand for dollar increases, the value of dollar increases, and corresponding, the value of rupee would fall down, and this would lead to what? This would lead to depreciation of Indian rupee. Understood? So this is the third factor, which is in direct correlation with the second factor that we did just now. Similarly, India has been for a long period of time importer of goods, so much so that our essential commodities like crude oil, we are dependent on imports to fulfill our domestic demand for crude oil. So much so that on an average, we import as much as 85% of our total crude oil requirement, and last year it stretched to 88% of our total demand of crude oil. So as a result, we have been under a long period of pressure, which is called as current account deficit. We import more than we export. So whenever imports increases into India, you need to understand, to pay for our imports, we need dollar, and this creates increased demand for dollar. And whenever there is an increased demand for dollar, the value of rupee declines. And this has also been driven down by costlier gold purchases, which is driving up the imports. And this has also weighed on the depreciation of rupee. Understood? Now let us consider another factor. I told you one of the ways in which the value of rupee with respect to dollars can be managed is by the intervention of the central bank. That is, in India's case, is the RBI. Now for a long period of time, RBI was defending the levels of 88.8 rupees per dollar by intervening in the forex market, by frequently selling the dollars in order to create the parity in demand for dollars and rupees. But since this value broke down, the investors got negative sentiment, and as you can understand, when investments are driven by sentiments, it led to further depreciation of rupee below the levels of 89 that we have just looked. So this is another factor, that is RBI was intervening up till the level of 88.8, and the official policy of RBI is that it only intervenes whenever there is an excessive volatility. It does not target a specific rate. So when this rate was breached, it led to fall in the value of rupees. Now, what would be the impact of decline in the value of rupee on Indian economy? Let us understand this. Now, first of all, I told you one of the important commodities that we import in large numbers are the crude oil. So much so that we are dependent on an average of 85% of total crude oil imports as far as our domestic needs are concerned. So whenever Indian rupee depreciates, our imports of crude oil become expensive, and this also plays a driving force in further pushing the value of dollars down. So all in all, when we pay for imports, that is a crude oil in dollars, these importing of crude oil would become more expensive in cases of depreciation of rupee. And this persistent need for importing more and more crude oil, irrespective of this cost, because this is an essential commodity, it quietly adds to the downward pressure of the rupee. Second factor is consumer level impact. Now, imported goods, whether it may be electronics, raw materials, or even some medicines which are essential for our day-to-day requirements, they become more expensive in cases of depreciation of rupee. And over the time, you must have realized that companies who rely heavily on imported goods to make their other components, their margins would erode, or their margins would reduce as far as profit margins are concerned. So to compensate for this reduced margin, companies might increase their raw material cost or their final product cost. And who would bear this burden? Consumers like you and I. So over time, there is a possibility that higher import cost can feed into inflation in India. And this specific case of inflation in India is called as the phenomena of imported inflation. What is imported inflation? When inflation increases in an economy due to rise in prices of imported goods. And one of the cases in which the prices of imported goods rise because of fall in the value of rupee, also called as depreciation of rupee. Now, it does not mean that fall in the value of rupee affects negatively the entire economy. There are some industries in our economy who benefit out of this fall in the value of rupee. These are prominently the exporters of goods and services. Now, one of the industries that are key exporters of goods and services in India are IT sector, textile, pharma. So these industries would benefit because their revenue for exports comes in US dollar, and ultimately whenever they convert this US dollar into rupee, they would get more rupee per US dollar in cases of rupee depreciation. Similarly, there is a large section of people who receive remittances. Remittances are one way for monetary transaction that comes from Indian origin people living outside India. So these people who are remittance receivers, and India is the highest receiver of remittances anywhere in the world, stronger US dollar means that in terms of rupees, they are getting more rupees as compared to before. So these are the people who also benefit, that are remittance receivers. People whose children, whose loved ones are working elsewhere and they are sending them dollars into India, right? So these are the people who are going to benefit. Now, the moot point of this discussion is fall in the value of rupee to an extent that we have discussed, is it a crisis? The answer is no, it is not a crisis. Why? Because India maintains a sizable portion of forex reserve, so much so that it is very close to $700 billion. And having this $700 billion worth of forex reserve gives us an import cover of somewhere between 10.5 to 11 months. So that is why India financially is stable. Similarly, have you understood what is the purpose of maintaining such a high forex reserve? Forex reserve is maintained by which organization? By Reserve Bank of India. And what purpose is this forex reserve used for? Forex reserve is used by RBI to intervene in the forex market. So the buying and selling of dollars that I was telling you, you know where those dollars come from? Those dollars come from forex reserve. So that is why when RBI is maintaining the sizable portion of forex reserve, we are safe. This is not a crisis. Similarly, macroeconomically also our fundamentals are stable, government's deficit is under control, our banking system is strong. So this does not give us a warning sign. And when it comes to external debt means the debt Indian companies have taken from external sources. So those external debt, if they are very high, it would bring India under the pressure of exchange rate crisis. So suppose if we have taken a lot of debt from external sources and if the value of rupees decline, we'll have to shell out more rupees to return those loans. But that is not the case with India. If you look, India's external debt is $736 billion, but when you compare it with GDP, it only means about 19.1% of GDP. And our foreign exchange rate reserves to external debt ratio is very close to 91%. So we are safe in this regard. So in this regard, you have to understand rupee is not collapsing. It is just merely adjusting. How it is adjusting? Because of the factors which I've already told you, factors of demand and supply. But that doesn't mean it is not a source of risk. Yes, it is a source of risk. Suppose hypothetically, if India-US trade deal does not materialize, it would further put pressure on our exporters because they would lose out the biggest export market, that is India. So it might lead to several further depreciation of rupee. Similarly, if US Federal Reserve decides to not reduce its interest rate, it would also lead to flow out of foreign portfolio investments away from India. This would also create a problem. What if value of oil increases sharply? In that case, we'll have to shell out more rupees for that same amount of oil imports. So that is also a problem. Similarly, if RBI decides to intervene aggressively in the foreign exchange reserve, our reserve, although it is very sizable, might deplete quite fast. So these are the risks we'll have to take care before letting understand this problem. To summarize, this problem is not a crisis. According to RBI, this is just the factors of demand and supply, which is adjusting the value of rupee to its original levels. And this is not in a way crisis because we have a stable economy. Now, before solving a PYQ, let me tell you something. What I taught you just now is only a small part of external sector. External sector includes a lot of topic, and we begin from the value of rupee and dollar, how the exchange rate is calculated. Now, what I just told you in a matter of say 22 minutes, it takes me usually few hours to discuss this topic because this is very important from an exam's point of view. Now, this was just a demo of an economy class. Similarly, other important subject matters are taken by their subject matter experts, and we take them in our resolution plus batches. To take admissions in our resolution plus batches, what you need to do, go to our website. These courses are available for 2027 and 2028. To take admissions to these batches, please keep one thing in mind. If you use the code ATS Live, you will fetch maximum discounts on all the courses, right? So if you use this code, you'll save about 7,000 rupees, which is a huge money, right? So please use this code and take admissions as soon as possible because the sale would end on 30th of November. Now let's see about this question. With reference to Indian economy, consider the following statements, and please remember this question appeared not so long ago in 2022. If inflation is too high, Reserve Bank of India is likely to buy government securities. Now whenever the RBI buys government securities, it inserts an equivalent amount of liquidity in the Indian economy, and this increased amount of liquidity would further lead to increase in prices, that is inflation. So this is not what happens in cases of high inflation. In high cases of inflation, RBI is likely to sell government securities to absorb excess liquidity. So first statement is incorrect. Now if rupee is rapidly depreciating, RBI is likely to sell dollars in the market. Now, what happens in case of rupee rapidly depreciating? The demand of dollar increases. And when demand for dollar increases? In cases of reduction in supply of dollars. So in that case, what should RBI do? If you were RBI, what would you do? You would increase the supply of dollar. And how would you increase the supply of dollar? You would sell the dollars in foreign exchange market, right? So second statement is right. In case of rapid depreciation of rupee, RBI sells dollars. Now, if interest rate in US or Europe were to fall, that is likely to induce RBI to borrow dollars. Now, this is a complex statement. First of all, when interest rate in US falls, the demand for bonds or alternative financial instruments increase in US. So whenever demand for bonds increase, bond prices increase, and we know bond yields have negative correlation with bond prices, so bond yields would fall down. So naturally, the attractiveness of bonds as a financial instrument for foreign investors would reduce. So in that case, they would invest more in Indian economy. So in Indian economy, foreign investment comes more. What happens is the supply of dollar increases. And when supply of dollar increases, the value of dollar falls and corresponding the value of rupee increases, right? Now, to control this appreciation of rupee, what would RBI do? It would suck out this excess supply of dollars in the economy. By how? By buying dollars in the economy. So third statement is a correct statement. What we understood from this discussion, second and third statements are right, and we have to identify the correct statement. Option B becomes your right answer. So this is how you solve the question, and this is a very technical topic. So I hope all of your doubts have been cleared. But if you still have any doubt, you can comment in the comment section. I will respond to you individually. And if you have any more doubts, you can go to this Telegram channel and ask me those doubts, which is where the notes will also be available. If you have troubles finding it, this is the QR code you can scan. So this is all from my side. Please have a very good day. And if you have any doubts, please do ask me in the comment section. So I'll take your permission. Please have a very good night.